Hello and welcome back to the channel. Thank you for joining me in another of my wonderful interviews. Today I want to talk to two gentlemen who've come together to put some protocols for health for humanity. They understand, having had a very brief chat to them beforehand, that we're not here just to be good slaves, healthy slaves for those people, the powers that were, as I'm now adopting as a way of describing them, because I feel that their end is nigh. And in fact, we're here to have a wonderful and thriving existence. Of course, we do come across stresses in life, problems, and disease. And we're going to get into that. I'd like to bring to you Graham Norbury and Jeremy Ayres. Jeremy, first of all, hello.
Hey, Richard, thank you so much for having us on. I know one of my great, quote unquote fans. We don't really have fans, but she calls her number one fan. Tracked you down in Totnes where she lives and said you've got to get Jeremy and Norbs on. So thank you for listening to her and thank you for having us here.
Well, it's absolutely my pleasure. And yes, I do get a few people sort of recommending others, and sometimes that comes along, and you think, oh, I don't know who these people are, and you know, time and research and all of that. So it's brilliant that you've found the time to talk to me, and I know from talking to you both briefly that you're bringing a completely different story than perhaps many of my other guests, although we're all bringing something to the table, which is fantastic. Now, let's start with you, Jeremy, if I may, because I know that you call yourself a senior practitioner on physical medicine. It says on your website. I'm looking at that, and we'll have a chat with both of you, Graham Norbury, who spent 30 years in stockbroking, which might sound, on the face of it, a very strange position to be on the show, but we'll find out that story. So, Jeremy, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do, and then you have something called the Naturally Better 90-day protocol, which is there to, obviously within that time period, make people a lot healthier. But it's more than just another health regime.
Oh, goodness. Yes, a lot more. So I think it's really important to understand how we got here before we get into what we do. So very
Yeah.
briefly, because, there's more extensive interviews about my story and Graham's story, but I was raised like probably most of us, in the system, raised to be good, raised to be honest, raised to work hard, and thought the world was how it was broadcast on the BBC News at night. And so, I think it's very important for people to understand, and your audience probably understands it, but you never know when new ears
Mm.
are coming to the channel, that people like myself, Graham, and all the people I work with didn't wake up one day and say, you know what, we're going to choose every controversial subject known to mankind and do the opposite of what the main understanding is, because that's going to win us friends, it's going to strengthen our family relationships, it's going to make us more money. Because as you will hopefully understand, Richard, it certainly does not when you start to be on the other side of what most people understand to be true and correct. There's a process to get there. Most commonly, it's called waking up or becoming awake, but it's an important process, and many have gone through that in the last few years that we called the COVID years, that we might get into why we call it COVID, but I'm sure your listeners knows. But essentially, I was an international athlete, represented Great Britain in canoeing. I'd been trained as a carpenter and joiner in a family business, and my life was pretty much set to go a certain way. But at the Olympic year, the year I was meant to go, so I was used to hard work and achieving, right? But the year I was meant to go, I hurt my back very badly, and I never liked doctors. I just have this, just never liked going to doctors. I think a lot of people that way. And someone told me to go to an osteopath who I didn't even know what that was. So I turned up at this portly chap, looked more like a butcher than a health guy, in a white coat in this a
Mm.
big clinic full of lots of students who do most of the work. Before I know it, I'm stripped down to my boxer shorts, and I've got an East European woman that has bigger muscles and more facial stubble than me, massaging me into tears. Shortly after that, Ron Johnson came in, without any explanation, put me into what I thought was a pseudo sexual position and adjusted me. Not that I knew what an adjustment was at that moment. A loud crack, and my pain had pretty much gone in my back. And so it was at that moment I realized I have to do this. I thought it was magic. I just thought it was the most powerful thing that's ever happened. And it set me off on a course that's turned out to be 30 years of learning. I started off in the best osteopathic college in the country. And after a year, I was bored out of my brains. And I was very surprised to be bored. And I was fortunate to meet a northerner. I'm a southerner. Who turned around to me one day and said, "This is crap, isn't it?" And I was shocked that someone else thought it. And cut a long story short, he took me up north to train with Harry Hawes, who became my first mentor, who his father had been trained by. And that was the first experience of being in the realms of what I would call a genius. He wouldn't have accepted those words. A true healer, he wouldn't accept those words either. But he was an absolutely brilliant man in his mid 70s. And even back then, I'm approaching 55 and I was 22 then, he was, and this is sort of pre-internet, he was telling me that the charities set up, the arthritis charities, the whatever you name it, the bodies that have been set up to apparently help people were not interested in actually getting people well. And he would explain to me how he'd gone there and been escorted physically out of the buildings, knowing he could help people. And so he set me off on that path that things weren't as they seem, and certainly that governments and registration and licensing had nothing to do with protecting quote unquote patients or the people, and everything to put people in a smaller box and ultimately to protect medicine, which, whether you know it or not, is the largest business model on the planet right now, and they only thrive when they have unhealthy people. That's their new client base. So it set me off on a life of learning. And when I graduated, I went to a osteopathic convention where I had a fantastic time. I got completely drunk the night before. I was having a fantastic time. And the next morning, this crazy woman was going to speak on water. 2 hours. Someone called Barbara Wren, who you may have come across, another genius. And I walked in the next day late, hungover, double doors into a hotel conference room, a bit like an old Western movie, walking into the bar. I walked in, I looked hungover, I looked terrible. And Barbara looked at me, everyone looked at me, and I sort of scuffled to the back, sat down. And Barbara began to continue what she was talking about. And within 15 minutes, my jaw was on the floor because I'd never heard anyone describe dis-ease before. And Barbara taught me, I was fortunate that she became my second mentor. She really taught me how to take a case history, what dis-ease is, what makes man sick. And from then, for the next 20 years, I delved deeper and deeper into it. And as you do, as Norbs will explain as well, the more you research, the more it isolates you, the more it puts you on what would be called the fringe, and even, labeling, like being called quacks and things like that, because you're getting further and further away from what the whole world has been repetitively educated to believe, which, with a few exceptions, is wrong. And that's how I'm here today, because as I've researched it and applied it, I have helped heal literally thousands and thousands of people worldwide, including my wife, who, when I met her 12 years, was labeled terminally ill.
I mean, this is a story, of course, that somebody like me, who's new to all of this, is discovering more and more the people who are actually coming up with healthy ways to get yourself better are ostracized, pushed away because of this fraud that is being pushed on of everyday people. And we see, I'm seeing this more and more, and I think the audience will completely be on your side with that, because they're watching this show and others like this for this very reason, and they're keen to learn how to become healthier and avoid hospitals, GPs, and so forth. And of course, we've seen that with the pandemic recently, in which your doctor doesn't actually seem to be your friend at all. Let's cross over to Graham then, and get a little bit of your story, because you're coming from, again, an equally different background, but coming to the same conclusion. Hello, Graham.
Hello, Richard, and thanks for having us on. My brother-in-law put me onto you a couple of years ago. He started watching, over a year ago. He started watching when you only had a few hundred views. So he was very pleased to hear that we were coming on today.
Oh, brilliant. Well,
A loyal follower from the early days.
yeah, lovely. Well, thank you very much. No, you said to me before we start, and this is what I suppose I always am taken aback when people come from completely a different route in. But you at 30 days in stockbroking, which you would think is and now I suppose I'm casting aspersions there, but I would think, there you are with lots of money, doing all the sort of stuff that stockbrokers would do, and here am I trying to sort of explore the truth, freedom, health, real health, and stuff, and think, golly, you're like on the other side, really, with making all that money and stuff. So, tell us about your journey.
Well, I used to be on the other side, but I was so asleep that I didn't even realise there were two sides.
Right.
Quite seriously. I come from a relatively humble background, grammar school educated, reasonably bright, very good memory. And so I literally dropped into stockbroking. I got very lucky, and I was able to do the job. I was well paid, as you rightly suggested, and I was engrossed in doing the job properly and trying to get things right and trying to spot trends and opportunities and all those sorts of things. And I was literally too busy with the day to day of news and share price movements and all these different influences that I didn't look into anything else in terms of the background of what was going on. And it was probably, I've been doing it about 10 years, so we would be late 90s. And I thought, I've been doing this for 10 years. I'm not a stupid guy. I should be able to make reasonable predictions about what's going to happen in the stock market. I should have honed my skills. But I'd be the first to admit that I was no better than tossing a coin, which I was quite disappointed about. And
Yeah.
so I began to say, well, look, there must be something I'm missing. There's something here. I'm not an idiot. Why can't I figure this out? And at that point, I discovered, this was early days of the internet. I discovered that the history of money and gold and things with intrinsic value and the gold backed monetary system. And I realized that since basically the First World War, when the Federal Reserve was created in order to finance the First World War, when we broke with the sound money, we have a new variable, which is the value of the money itself. And that variable can be adjusted by the central banks, and they can direct money to their friends, they can direct to certain areas, to certain countries. And so you then realize that what you're betting on in the stock market is actually rigged by the people behind the scenes, because they have a hose pipe of liquidity that they can direct wherever they like. And so if you know when the hose pipe is going to be switched on and where it's going to be directed, you can benefit from the moves in the stock market. And that's just a simplistic view of it. So once I realized that, I recognized that the job I was doing was inherently fraudulent. And my role in that was merely akin to a commentator sitting in a balcony at Caesar's Palace Casino in Las Vegas, commenting, saying, well, some guy's betting on red and he's won, and this guy's bet on black and he's lost. And so that's a very dispiriting, once you figure out that your job, however well paid it is merely commenting on other people gambling, some of whom have the inside track, it's very dull indeed. And so I began at that point to, once you discover one element of the fraud and the lies, you then begin to delve into other things. So I worked through I was working during the 9/11 supposed terrorist attacks, and I took them at face value because we were busy with the volatility in the markets. I didn't have time to research into it. But a couple of years later, so 2003, I then began to look at that and realized that the official story is far from being accurate. And then you get down other rabbit holes and other rabbit holes, and you go into these dark places, and you realize that, oh my God, we've been lied to all our lives. And I think it takes a certain type of person to be able to sort of stand there and say, I am willing to potentially accept that everything I have ever been told might be wrong.
Yeah.
And then actually, when the dust settles in your own mind, you come out with what you really feel to be the actual truth. And at that point, I then became a father, began to become a bit more responsible about my own health. So I started to look into health. And I quickly realized that most of what we're taught about health and disease and nutrition and treatments and medicines is false. And so I began to look further, and I was lucky enough to find an American neurosurgeon called Jack Kruse, who he had had a similar situation in his life, and he'd looked back and gone, I'm a genius medical person, fully trained at the top of my game, and even I've realized that what we've been taught is wrong. And so he introduced the concept of light, water, and magnetism as being the fundamental drivers of human beings, and in fact, most creatures on Earth. And when you realize that medical doctors are taught that water is neutral and can be ignored, they're not taught about light apart from sunlight being dangerous, which is wrong. And they're not taught anything about magnetism. And so once you get in your head that those three factors are very important and they're completely ignored by the health system, you can quite quickly realize that the health system is built on a foundation of lies.
Yeah.
And you then look into the chronic disease epidemic, and you realize that the health system is going to collapse under its own weight of incompetence. And human beings are going to need to take responsibility for their own health. And with some relatively simple information, they can, with confidence, take full sovereignty of their own health and avoid doctors and avoid disease and avoid hospitals in the main. I mean, if you get run over by a bus, hospitals are great. They can put you back together. If you have something massively traumatic happen to you, they're great places. But if you have any of the so-called modern diseases, the chronic diseases, they have a faulty understanding at a medical level of the origin of the disease, and so they get them wrong. It's huge business because they just treat them with pills and then it never solve the problem. But they, at a fundamental level, they've started from the wrong point. And so they're faced with having to backtrack to such a degree that their entire system and industry is at risk. Therefore, they can't. And so I then became really interested in the fact that the health system we have will collapse over the next 10, 20 years. And I was disinterested in the financial system, and I just thought there's going to be an enormous opportunity. I'm not talking about a financial opportunity. I wanted to do something that I was passionate about. My passion for the financial thing had gone, and I was truly passionate about understanding healthcare. I'm good at understanding complex systems, and I'm quite good at explaining them to everyday people in a fairly concise manner. And that's kind of how I crossed paths with Jeremy via a Facebook group that we both happen to be on.
Can I tag team you there, Norb?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I think it's really important what Norb's just said, Richard, because a little bit of history is just over 100, 110 years ago, I think it is now. Osteopathy, chiropractics, naturopathy, herbalism, homeopathy, and allopathic medicine were on equal footing. And there was the Rockefeller Foundation under the Carnegie, formed something called the Carnegie Group, a bit like these modern NGOs, and did a very skewed investigation into the standards of quote unquote medicine, which essentially was called the Flexner Report. And it's since the Flexner Report that was entirely really designed as a business model to completely crush, eradicate, and water down and hopefully lose all the natural modalities, philosophies of medicine. And that's when they introduced the word alternative as well, because if you're going to use the word alternative, then modern medicine is alternative. It's the youngest medicine on the planet, but it isn't a medicine, it's a business model. And so when viewers are listening, if they don't know about the Flexner Report and how essentially they changed everything and they set up new standards, and you could only reach those standards with a lot of money. And guess where the money came from? The very people that set the report up. And if you accepted that money, otherwise you would not be able to meet their standards, you had to have a member of the Carnegie group within your hospital or college. And bit by bit, the rotten apple, spread and ruined osteopathy, chiropractics, homeopathy, herbalism, naturopathy, which were complete and very successful. They're a shadow of their former self, mostly today. And so if people understand that, then it's easier for them to understand that doctors, nurses, surgeons, whatever, aren't necessarily inherently evil or anything like. We're not saying that. We know they're full of very good people trying to do the very best in circumstances they really don't understand. But what they can understand is the business model has trained essentially very educated drug dealers. And once you see that, how if you flip it to how it is in China or used to be in China, people before profit, where you used to pay your doctor to keep well, and that philosophy works very well. What do they need to keep this business growing and growing and growing? They need sick people. Well, if you need sick people, how do you make people sick? Because the diseases that mankind enjoys today, to use such language, didn't really exist 100, 150, 200 years ago. They're not found in nature, right? No. And so we know how to make people, human beings, sick. Poverty, malnutrition, chemical, heavy metal toxins, stress, and now, which is Norb's main area, light and electromagnetic pollution, which is the invisible spectrum, possibly the most causative reason for people now getting ill. Just think of COVID. How many people went outside for 2 years? And how many were inside exposed to artificial light, and how that light affects your hormonal and every aspect of your body clock and circadian rhythm. So once people start to grab that, their minds can open to listen to what we do, how we do it. And all we've ever fought for, and all we ever will fight for, is the right to critically question and think about things. And when you create that space, people can start to see things differently. Up until then, they've been trained to butt heads with you. Have you seen your study? Which makes us laugh, because we've spoken to true scientists, including Graham Atkinson, the red pill pharmacist. There's hardly any true science going on around the world. There's corporate and institutional educational science. 95% of science isn't science, right? So, and it's an oxymoron to say trust the science. The very opposite. You should challenge the science. So we're in this realm that most people who aren't your listeners don't know what they're in yet. And so when they hear someone like me and Norbs, it's like, oh my God, they're mad.
Yes.
You know?
except that, of course, if you take away the 100 years that we've just been, in which this experiment has happened, in which finance is put first, and you were to remove these dreadful 100 years, although we've progressed in many ways scientifically and what have you, as you so rightly alluded, if we didn't have that financial, think where we would be now if we had invested more into those alternative, those natural remedies, rather than the crap that we have at the moment. One of the things that Graham said there, which I picked up, is that the fact that it has kept the whole industry, or these people behind all of this, the people pushing this, has kept us very busy so that we don't notice it. And life is so stressful, so busy, the whole money thing about having to work extra long hours, both parents are working, mother and father, so that enlightened people are not seeing the fraud in front of them. Can I pick up those three things that you were talking about, the water, the light, and the magnetism, and just talk a little bit about that, because
Sure.
we certainly know how...
It's critical.
Yeah.
It's critical, but go ahead if you wanted to ask.
No, I was going to say, just let's start with the water.
Yeah, let me go there. So Dr. Jack Kruse is a genius. I'm not saying he has everything right, but he has gone back to old papers that were written by Russian scientists. He's had them translated. He's looked into different disciplines, quantum mechanics, talking about the ether, vibrations, resonances. And ultimately, what he has laid out with citations and links and everything, it's very deep science, and it's not easy to understand. But he lays out that fundamentally we are electric beings. Our bodies are 70% water by weight, but given that water is such a tiny molecule, we are 99% water by number of molecules, which means every single cell in your body is just constantly surrounded by water. And our bodies reverse the process of photosynthesis. Plants get hit by sunlight, they take water from the ground and carbon dioxide from the air, and they produce oxygen and sugar. We take food. That food in our bodies is processed in our mitochondria, and we produce energy in the form of ATP. We produce carbon dioxide, and we produce water. And so we're reversing the process of photosynthesis. And so the light that is captured, if you think of plants growing, that is captured sunlight. It's frozen sunlight energy at the time the plant was growing. When we metabolize that food, when we eat it and use it, we release not only the energy, but we release the photonic fingerprint of the light that originally formed it. And so we have a process in our mitochondria where we create a flow of electrons and protons, which is a current. Whenever you get a current, you have a perpendicular magnetic force, magnetic field. And so our mitochondria are these tiny, they're described as the powerhouse of the cell. That's what your typical doctor will tell you. But they're actually nanomagnetic sensors which are constantly sensing our environment, whether that be the food that we've taken in, what we're doing, how we're moving, the light that we're seeing. And they constantly make adjustments to the functioning of the cell, and they actually control the expression of DNA, of our genes. And so this is the root of health, and it's the root of all disease, how our mitochondria deal with environmental inputs. So the root of all chronic disease and all cancers lies in mitochondrial dysfunction. But the medical system has spent 99% of its funding looking at the nuclear DNA, which virtually never changes. They think that you have these things going on saying, oh, we have a genetic disease. That's simply not the case. There are some very rare genetic diseases. Yes, that's true. But cancer is not one of them. And so that's why I said earlier that the health system is going to collapse because of its inability to admit that it has failed to understand the fundamental cause of chronic disease, and it's mitochondrial dysfunction. And so if you address the mitochondrial dysfunction, you can eliminate all chronic diseases. And mitochondria run on light and magnetism, and they have to be surrounded by water. So that's the kind of, in a nutshell, view of how.
But it's even more profound than that, isn't it, Norbs? It's even more profound than that, because that what everything Norbs has explained there, and Professor Thomas Seyfried is the expert on some of the things that he mentioned. It's far more profound than that, and you'll see the nefarious interplay against mankind, hopefully, when I explain the next bit. But, everything that is seen as good or godly is referred to as light,
Yeah.
God is good. God is the light of the world. that sort of thing. And everything that is evil, which interestingly is the word live, reversed, because essentially they've turned how we live upside down. But everything that is evil is dark and the lack of light. And the human body or the human cells are literally living batteries with a very meant to have a strong positive charge on the outside of the cell and a strong negative charge on the inside the cell. And that depletes during your day. In a normal natural world, that would deplete. And as the sun goes down, you would lay down usually on animal skin or hay or the earth where there's a field of electrons, and it would literally be like plugging your cell phone in during the night. The moon, which most people know has a pull on the sea, it has a pull on sodium, would pull sodium out of the cell, but water follows sodium. And so the cell essentially detoxes itself from its day's, work, if you like, very simplistically. And then in the morning, you would wake up refreshed, recharged, literally recharged and ready to go. And you'd stand up and the sun would be dominant. Now, what has happened is what I'm teaching you, the all capitals, they know this. And they also knew we were astrologically coming into a time of more light. Now, if people, I'm not talking about you're going to meet a tall, dark, handsome stranger astrology. I'm talking about true astrology. Every empire has been predicted to collapse by astrology, and this empire lies also, but they know it. So what they would have done is gone, how can we possibly prevent mankind from holding light, more light, and seeing through the darkness of what we've been doing? And so what they do is they apply fear and poison. Now, fear is their most used tool. Why? Because when you're in a state of fight or flight, which most people have heard that expression, you literally physiologically change. You cannot digest food properly. Imagine you're sitting there eating your favorite sandwich and, masked men burst in now. Your appetite vanishes. You're not like, oh, I'm just going to finish my... It goes. Physiologically, the blood is diverted to your muscles and brain to run or fight, right? Okay? So most people are now constantly in a state of fight or flight. They call it worry, anxiety, stress, whatever it is. And it's been designed that way because it's extremely exhausting energetically.
Yes.
You also become by default nutrient deficient, so weaker. And if you look at it now from a point of view of voltage and you ask people out of 10, right now, whoever's listening, what's your energy like? Most people say to me and Norbs, 3 out of 10, 4 out of 10. So what they're showing us is their voltage has dropped. Now, when your voltage drops, you literally can't hold as many electrons onto the outside of the cell, which are negatively charged, and electrons attract photons, which are positive. So you literally have reduced your ability to attract or hold light. Now, okay, some people will be listening and go, well, a load of rubbish. But what happens when you're depleted in voltage? You become dark in thoughts. And the last 2 years was a primary example of that. Many people got very isolated and had very dark thoughts for the future. So the protocols that I've used and learned over 30 years, we put into a membership because we knew how many people were isolated with the sole intent to teach them what I've just shared with you, much more than that, and to raise their voltage. Why? Because then they hold more light. When they hold more light, they start to see a brighter future. They start to see who they are and what they can do. And that's why I say we're not here to make healthier slaves. We've been human doings by design. We need to become human beings. And when you understand how in this realm, whatever this realm really is, but when you understand in this realm how we were meant to function and you start honoring that, miracles happen, not just in health, but in relationships and the ability to be creative, which I think is what this realm ultimately is our ability to express all kinds of creation.
Well, and I would agree with you absolutely there. And we can see, I mean, it seems a lot more obvious, of course, in the last few years, maybe not to everybody, but I think more and more people are beginning to become aware that things are not quite right, even if they don't have the illumination that we have. Tell me again, so you've told me about water. Tell me about the magnetics and the magnetism, how that affects us and what we can do.
Okay, well, magnetism, if you think about how we are designed to live, let's go back to, I don't know how many thousand years you want to go, but we used to live naked, barefoot, wandering around on the planet. And during the day, we would get up and we could see what we were doing because the sun was out. We'd be exposed to the sunlight. We'd be exposed to the Earth's magnetic field, and we'd be charging about, chasing animals, and that sort of thing. And there'd be moments of stress, very short moments of stress. And then at night time, it went dark and you couldn't do anything else because you couldn't see. So you would then sleep. The magnetic field of the Earth strengthens at night time, as it does also in winter. And as Jerry said before, you would then recharge. You would be in a place of absolute stillness, and there would be literally no disturbance whatsoever. And you would sleep. You would be in cellular calm. Your cells would not be being stressed by anything else, and so they have that nighttime is when all the repairs are made. So whatever damage you've done during the day is repaired at nighttime. And then you wake up in the morning and you're refreshed and you're ready to go again with a fully repaired system. So if you look at what we're doing today, very few people do that. We wear clothes, we wear rubber-soled shoes, we switch on electric lights when the sun goes down, we watch Netflix in bed, we leave the Wi-Fi switched on. And so if you can get a Netflix signal, a Wi-Fi signal in your bedroom, and you don't turn your Wi-Fi off, your body will be bathed in radiation that's vibrating 2.5 billion times a second. And so that's far from being cellular calm. And so if we have literally nano electromagnetic sensors, the mitochondria, in every cell of our body, we have trillions of these things, and they require an extremely delicate balance of the magnetism from the Earth, which sort of linchpin of things, and then you have the light flowing and the electrons flowing and creating currents and another electromagnetic field. And bear in mind, electromagnetism is capable of bending light. And so if we create a flow in our mitochondria, we are actually able to control light within our mitochondria, depending on the strength of the magnetic field that we're able to create. And we're also able to release the light. And so we have in each cell, every second, there's something like 100,000 chemical reactions taking place. And the only way of controlling that is by using light, is by using effectively almost laser light. We think of chemistry as this chemical reacts with this chemical. And at school, you were taught there was this little stick that connected the two together, because that was just a way of explaining it. But in fact, what actually happens is it's light that connects things. So when two molecules connect, they're resonating, and there's a light frequency between the two of them, and that causes this to connect to this. And then when that connects, it releases another form of light, which then creates another reaction. So the whole thing is incredibly complex, and you don't need to understand it because it's built into us. It's supposed to happen automatically. That's how we were designed, whether it's by a higher being or whether it's by evolution, whichever way you want to think. Here we are, and this is how we function. And we have Russian scientists showed this almost 100 years ago, that our bodies release light, and we actually release light that is more powerful, not more powerful, of a higher frequency than is present in the sun.
Wow.
So we actually produce light that's of a higher frequency higher wavelength. I might do apologize. Into the ultraviolet range,
Right.
we actually, our bodies are capable of producing this level of light. It's very, very tiny, very weak, but it is in a range which it's not coming from the sun, because we know that wavelength is blocked by the atmosphere. So there are now machines on the market that can test this, and they can show that light is being released. So all our bodies use this light, water, and magnetism. And the other thing, there's a chap who's discovered the Gerald Pollack, who a few years ago he's done a lot of work on water, and he wrote a book which is quite easy to understand, called The Fourth Phase of Water, and how water has a plasma-like phase, which can then exclude protons, and so it's driven by light. So if water is in a confined space and it's hit by infrared light, which we get from the sun, the water becomes more ordered, more structured. So the energy has been added to the water. It's the opposite of entropy. It's negative entropy. And then when the water is in this state, which it's been pre-ordered by the infrared, if it's then hit by ultraviolet light, the water is able to absorb even more energy and become even more structured. So as you move away from disorder towards order, that requires energy, but you've then captured energy in the water. And then if you release that energy, the water then goes back to being more disordered, but you have a battery of energy that you've built up, energy and information. So it's very, very subtle. And here we get into this is how you can actually explain how homeopathy works. I used to think, because I was a regular scientific-minded person, I used to dismiss homeopathy as it's all woo-woo nonsense because there's nothing in it.
Yes.
But once you have this understanding of the subtleties of water and its interaction with light, you can see how water can be imprinted with energy and information. And there's a Japanese chap who showed this, that if you speak nicely to water and then you freeze it, it produces lovely patterns. And if you curse at the water and then you freeze it, it produces sort of dissonant patterns. And so this is something that I would have dismissed 15 years ago. I would have dismissed it out of hand. But now I would happily sit down and argue the case for the validity of homeopathy and many other disciplines, which I would have previously dismissed as stuff and nonsense.
Can I give some practical examples of what you just said?
Yeah. Let me just say to the audience that I have got a lady coming on who is a practitioner of homeopathy who will be appearing on the show, just to give that a little plug whilst Wonderful. We go. But yeah, no, please, Jeremy.
So Norbs is if it's the first time you've met Norbs, you may not fully appreciate it, but he really does he has studied highly complex systems to try and communicate it in as few words as possible. And I think he does a great job. But if you've understood the premise of what he just explained, I want to give you some practical examples of that on what I began to explain with you, Richard. If in nature, you've probably all seen wildlife documentaries in the wild, in the jungle, what have you. If an animal gets injured, it will usually try and find water and lay down in the sun and just basically sunbathe and naturally fast and drink water without apparent distress. And hopefully it will heal before a predator finds it. But that's essentially what it will do. Now, in a human realm, we recently, actually, it was only me because Norbs couldn't be there that day, but I had a wonderful conversation with an Australian psychologist, ex-cricket player, I believe, very humble, gentle chap. And I've lived in New Zealand. I've worked with the Māori and the Aborigine of Australia, and I know how troubled and decimated they are by modern man. They've basically become alcoholics, drug addicts, and terrible problems. And in Australia, of course, he works with the Aborigine, and many of them are seriously mentally ill, like seriously mentally ill. And so he addicts, all kinds of problems with that. So he went and spoke with the elders. He held a meeting for about 3 or 4 days where he just sat with them, and They went on walkabout and they came back and they decided they needed to do three things with these incredibly damaged Aboriginal, usually men. And the first one was they must not go into the man system. So the Aborigines see there's two worlds: the fake world, which is the one that we're describing, and then there's the real world, which we're trying to teach. So he said the elders agreed it was imperative that a label was not ascribed to them. You have blah, 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 right? And number two, that they go walk about with the elders for a minimum of 3 days barefoot. And so this psychologist went with these like as serious mental illness as you can imagine. They went barefoot, walkabout in the bush. And by the third day, without exception, these men would come back to at least being able to start to talk and think and have a rational conversation. You couldn't say healed or cured or whatever word you want to use, but certainly the human being returned and they could start to talk of the traumas or life. And that's 3 days under this, exactly what Norbs is talking about. They were earthing, they were getting electrons, they were discharging, they were not having their mitochondria interfered with electromagnetic fields. They were night and day, so they'd get the right signals to sleep and wake, and they were with human beings. And so that's profound at that level. And that's what we need to reintroduce. We don't want to reject technology that serves mankind, but mankind must be the master. And right now, just about everything is upside down, where we're the slave and the master is the technology and the comfortable life of swipe right or whatever it is that we've fallen. Well, we weren't fallen, we've been led into. But really, we have to embrace being uncomfortable again. But I believe we can be comfortably uncomfortable, and the benefits are immense.
I think at this point, I just want to mention something briefly before Richard comes back in. We're all of the age. This is something I picked up from one of your earlier videos, Richard, talking about the analog and the digital world. I think you were discussing your recording setup with somebody. And we're all of the age where we grew up with analog, with vinyl records and tape decks and things like that. And we understand live music as being the true analog. And then we moved into the digital age, and now we're able to do this broadcast because of the digital technologies. And so we don't want to reject all these excellent tools that we have at our disposal, but we all yearn to go to a live music concert or to listen to some quality vinyl recordings because of the warmth that's in them. And so there's something magical about the analog world, which we're all fortunate enough to actually remember. And so I think we have to strike a balance between the magic and the warmth of the analog world, which we have to maintain, which is real human to human contact, and using the digital tools to our advantage, but not allowing the digital tools to take over everything that we do and think, which is the bio, what's it called, the bioconvergence technology that's going to run our lives, and that's something that but the analog digital thing is something. It's a knife edge, and it's fine to be on the edge of it, but we have to understand that it's like any knife edge. It's interesting, but also dangerous.
Yes. So I would certainly agree that when my kids were going through school and my daughter went to college and she was interested in photography, they were still teaching the analog way of developing film and actually using film and editing. Now, I don't know whether they do that now because it would look so backward. And yet I think that's so vital that you handle real objects and know the process, and then you can appreciate how marvelous the digital thing is because it speeds things up and you can be quicker. But if you've experienced getting your hands bleached with developer and things like that, and you know the visceral effect of chemicals and what they do and how it produces the film and things like that, you can understand that it is a real process that has moved moved on. And you're quite right. We both share one leg in the old world, in the old system, and the magic of that, and also the frustration of that, with the new world, and and I think young people do not appreciate just how amazing the digital stuff has revolutionized things, and that does seem to be a bit of a problem. I want to draw us back, because we're coming to the end, because you mentioned earlier about light, and of course I'm sitting here under LED lights. We hear about the problem with street lights all going on to LED lights and different type of electrical lights. Now, I'm assuming this has all got to do with the vibration and the frequency that those lights are out. Could one of you tell me why that is dangerous for us?
Yes, absolutely. Well, medicine and doctors have been trained that light it's not something they learn about at all. But over the last, let's say, 15 years, we have discovered that we have, when we all went to school, we were taught that we have two receptors in our eyes, rods and cones.
Yeah.
But about 15 years ago, it was discovered that we had a third receptor. It's non-visual, but it's specifically tuned to detect the absence or presence of blue light. And the majority of screens and LEDs, etc., are tuned to produce blue light. They produce blue with a little bit of orange, and it tricks our mind into thinking it's natural light. But they have a massive peak just in this exact range, which we have a detector in our eyes. It's also been, over the last 15 years, or slightly more recently, we keep discovering that we have melanopsin in our blood vessels. We have it in our subcutaneous fat. We have melanopsin receptors for blue light everywhere. And so we are supposed to get blue light in sunlight when the sun comes up, and it triggers our receptors to sort of wake us up and prepare the cells for what's coming later in the day. And so we need a certain amount of blue light. However, blue light in sunlight is never present without the rest of the sun, which is mainly red and infrared. And so if you have just blue light with no red and infrared, you're creating a damaging stimulatory inflammatory signal, and you don't have the counterbalancing healing and calming of the red and the infrared. So it's damaging. It's not natural. And in that sense, it's disrupting the very basis of our design. Bear in mind, we were designed, every living creature on Earth is designed by sunlight, because sunlight is the only energy that's coming into us. And so even the most basic creature responds to light and dark.
So the damaging effect of this, if I can jump in, is that through our eyes? Is it also getting onto our skin and other areas?
The eyes are the most sensitive,
Right.
and they get damaged, and they connect more direct. There's more pathways leading from the melanopsin cells in the eyes to different parts of the brain. There's many pathways. The skin is probably the next level, and so we need to protect. If you're out in sunlight, you don't need to protect your eyes at all. That's natural, and you shouldn't need to protect your skin once you've built up enough exposure. I mean, if you've never been outside and you've
you don't want the lobster effect.
Yes, exactly.
You just burn
but
yourself.
In general, we sunlight is good for us and beneficial.
Yes.
But if you're moving into the inside life and you're using artificial light, you need to have a source of red and infrared, and that's why the old incandescent bulbs were actually not too bad, because they had plenty of red and infrared. That's why they gave off heat, and which is why they were banned. And of course, they were the healthiest ones, so they banned those and left us with the more damaging ones. And so it's extremely disturbing if you use artificial light after dark. You're damaging the cells by overstimulating them at the wrong time of day, but you're also not giving your body the signal of darkness. That's the time we should be preparing to go into the cave.
If you were using candlelight and the sort of natural firelight after dark,
that's absolutely fine. That's not in any way damaging. And so we're getting so many things wrong in the last 100 years. It's getting conflicting signals. It sees the sun go down, it feels the temperature drop, and it naturally knows it's nearly bedtime. And then we put on the lights or we flick on Netflix or something, and that tells your brain that it's midday. And so it knocks everything out of sync. And if you do that for a long period of time, you build up a chronic health, what's called disease. And then you go to the doctor and he gives you some pills because he doesn't understand the light impact.
No. And that's one of the issues that we've seen, where you're just always creating problems because you're not getting to the source of the issues. So listen, we've chatted a lot, and I want to bring you back to your Naturally Better 90-day health protocol and what you're doing and how you're helping people in winding up this conversation, which of course we could probably go on for ages, and I want people to be able to find out more about you. Jeremy, could you tell us a little bit about what you're offering and what people can do and find out more and all of that?
Yeah. Thank you, Richard. We could probably talk all day, but we set a 90-day challenge or protocol because, in my experience of helping people from the worst conditions you can imagine down to everyday sort of problems, when you start doing the right things, it takes about 90 days for people to reconnect with their body, because the body is going to tell you. We could be lying, we could be wrong, it could be all kinds of things. But I was taught this way: get people to reconnect with their body and listen to their body and let it guide you the rest of the way. So as Graham was trying to explain, we are in a time of such enormous manipulation. Light's been used for many years. The factory farm chickens, for example, they are in constant blue light. It's not so they can see each other crammed up in little pens. It manipulates their hormonal body so they lay more eggs. That's why they use it in the equine horse industry to extend the fertility duration by keeping the mares under blue light. And imagine, we've got a few hormonal problems around the world right now with confusions, and imagine how many of our youth are constantly putting blue light on their
phones. Yeah.
Right. So, but they don't know what they don't know. No. So in 90 days, Graham and I have pre-recorded about 44 vlogs. We do two every week. And we did it when we deliberately go walking in the Lake District and record them outside. They're very entertaining, very knowledgeable. But we introduce people in a very palatable way to frequently what they don't know they didn't know. And as they start to see that, and it makes such sense, it's so simple. That's the problem for most people. It's so simple. They can then understand why we suggest what we suggest. So a lot of it's subtraction, taking things out before you put things in, so you can reestablish this connection with your body and feel your way. And what happens is people start to feel a lot better, and then they get enough energy and their body starts to discharge or detox. So they go through the cleanse, heal cycles. But usually at the end of 90 days, if you do it properly, people are going, oh my God. And then in honesty, if you're very unwell, 3 months, 1 year is about the time it takes to heal someone who's very unwell. But after 3 months, almost without exception, you've got people going, oh my God, I can't believe the difference. And it really is simple. It's keep it simple, stupid. We've been just so veered into the wrong areas of how we were designed to function. It's why pets get sick. They've been brought inside the house. They're sleeping by the Wi-Fi. They're being fed not their natural diet. They're being kept inside instead of outside. Whereas wild dogs, feral cats don't have those kind of problems. So it's really beautiful. It's very entertaining. And then you've got the community who are just astounding. They just astound us both, how they are helpful, supportive. They have live conversations with each other on our forum. It's absolutely brilliant, Richard.
Yeah, go on.
So I was going to say, I would say that when I first met Jeremy, and he had a website which had some testimonials on it, and I read the testimonials, and I thought, hang on a minute, this guy, he must be a con man. They were so ridiculously positive. I thought he must have been written them himself or whatever. But as I've worked with him over these last few years, and we've developed the 90-day challenge, the testimonials are all absolutely genuine, and the turnarounds that you see in people, and we do this regular every week. We do a video Q&A for people who have doubt. They get the protocol, they follow it. Some people do, some people don't. Some people find it overwhelming, and so we have a Q&A where people can reach out for help. And you see people on the Q&A, and they come on the first time, and they're dark, and they've got they're just the energy about them is just very, very heavy. And then we give them some help and guidance. Then we record these vlogs, and people like them, and the community and all this thing goes on. And then the same person comes back in a couple of months' time, and they come on the Q&A, and you don't recognize them. You look, you go, is that the same woman? Was that the woman that was like? It is truly remarkable. I mean, I'm not just blowing his trumpet.
No.
All I'm saying is it is genuine. If you go onto his webpage, scroll down for the testimonials, and they are all genuine. I personally guarantee they're genuine. I know many of the people face to face.
Brilliant stuff. Well, listen, we've just been talking for an hour, and I like to keep these as tight as I can to an hour, so that people actually watch them and get to the end and not think they're too long to watch. So I really appreciate being introduced to what you're doing and learning more about light, magnetism, and of course water. And I will continue to offer the platform to people who are talking about this sort of thing, because, as you say, a lot of people have no idea that this stuff exists, and it's incredibly good for us. And it is as natural as, well, I was going to say as natural as we were born, but we're born in such awful times at the moment where people are manipulating all that natural stuff and trying to keep the skies dim and the water full of awful things. But gentlemen, Jeremy and Graham, thank you so much for coming on the show and talking to me. I will, of course, leave the website in the description for people to go and investigate, make up their own minds, of course. I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much. It's been interesting to chat.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard.
My pleasure. Thank you very much. So there we are, ladies and gentlemen. I will be back again with more monologues and more wonderful guests. Do check those all out. I also understand that Jeremy and Graham are the author of something called hang on, I've got to find it now, the Red Pill, it's a long scroll down, the Red Pill Revolution. There it is. Thank you so much. So do check that out, and that says it's a practical field guide to staying sane and healthy in a crazy world, which I think sums up what we all are trying to do. Do tune in again, but in the meantime, from Jeremy and Graham and myself, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.